There has been an outcry by the player base of World of Tanks console to get more maps, and so Wargaming have been giving us more maps, but of course they aren't necessarily the maps that are actually the ones that we want, and there's some things I want to cover in terms of the maps on the game in this video. If you have your own thoughts, let me know in the comment section down below. It's always interesting to see what you guys actually think. What are the problems with some of the maps that you see, and how can they be combated in the game as it currently stands? So, first things first, we have Province, which was recently introduced as a map. Now, it was already a map in the game. It was one that was basically playing up to like tier 4 or something like that, maybe tier 5, I believe, in the game previously, when it was used to be in the game prior to update 6.0, where all of the maps basically got thrown in the bin and then they had to make them all again. And so Province was one of the low tier maps, and of course, in typical Wargaming fashion, in order to essentially give us more maps, they put a map designed to be like low tier, like tier 4, tier 5, all the way up to tier 10. Which means that when you do spawn into the map, you're playing essentially with the entire map's view range. If you have max view range in your tank, so light tanks can spot the entire map. Obviously there's buildings in the way and stuff like that that avoid people being spotted, but essentially if you're out in the open, you get spotted regardless, really, unless there's some like bush or other things that go on in terms of the game in that regard. But open area with no cover and no bushes, you get spotted very, very easily on the map, which basically means that the gameplay style ends up being a camp fest at tier 10, and basically a camp fest from any tier above tier 8, because most tier 8s can get maximum view range within the game. And I'm pretty sure that if you've played Province or see it come up in the map rotation, most of you, and you included, might think, oh damn it, I've got Province, okay, cool, brilliant, this is going to be really good if I'm playing in my heavy tank or tank destroyer with high alpha. Otherwise it's probably going to be pretty bad, because the problem with maps like this and having them at higher tiers is that when you have a map that basically everyone gets spotted when they do get spotted, and then instantly taken out because everyone on the opposite side of the map is going to be focusing on that one person that gets spotted every single time, that when a person does get spotted, they instantly get taken out. It's like not even a question. Most people die straight away when they are playing on Province and get removed from the game very, very quickly. Now, that isn't necessarily the case on some of the other maps. Now, it does happen. I'm not going to say it doesn't happen. But with so many high tier TDs, high tier alphas that you're going to be seeing with some things like the Ruthless, the FE4005, FE215B183, the Jaegeru, and all of the other tier 10 TDs, and even some of the tier 10 heavies alongside some of the tier 10 mediums like the AVRE. If you get spotted, a lot of those tanks are going to hit you, and when they do, you can only take 2 shots. And because everyone is camping pretty much for the most part, because if you move on the map you get spotted, and therefore the exact thing that we've been talking about happens to you, that most people don't bother moving, and the only time at which it is actually possible to move on the map is right at the beginning, when people are trying to get into a spot where they can camp for the entire game. Now, this means that a lot of the time Province at higher tiers, in my opinion, is just a terrible map. It does not work because of that fact. There's no movement on the map. Pretty much if you go to one flank on the map, you're stuck there for the entire game. You can't move away, because if you do, you get spotted, you get taken out. And if you don't move and you actually just sit there and wait for other people to move, you end up winning. And so it becomes a horrific, and I mean a horrific, actual kind of camp fest between the two sides. And the only way that you actually win is if you make early pushes at the beginning of the game with enough of your team to constantly keep the enemy team lit up during that time, and also that you're actually dealing enough consistent damage throughout the game to those opponents that you're spotting in particular once you've made the push over to the other side. And that is kind of the only real way to win actual Province, like by pushing. And even then, sometimes what you find is the entire enemy team decide that they're just going to YOLO you, and then you're out of the game, and then they can camp again. And this is something that is definitely a map that probably shouldn't be at tier 10, and probably shouldn't even be at tier 8, to be honest, because of the same issues. Maybe I would push it as far as tier 7 as a top tier tank, where, you know, you're not meeting like tier 9s or anything like that, just top tier, tier 7. but even then, a lot of the tier 7s, light tanks, the mediums can even push up to max view range, and so you have the same sort of problem. And I think that is really the issue with Province as a map. It is just so small. It is 850 by 850, which if you were to compare it to a lot of the other maps in the game and how open that map actually is compared to some of the other ones, yeah, it's just not ideal. It is just a huge open map with basically the central corridor of the map being the like dip or valley that you cannot go into, so literally only half of the map is available to you, and even that, probably of that half of the map that you have available to you, probably only half of that again is actually usable, because if you're sat right at the back, at the very back of the map, you're not doing anything because you can't see anything. So you've probably only got 25% of a playable map in terms of the gameplay. So it becomes very boring, and even just from a standpoint of engagement, fun, the map is very boring. So why bother having it at tier 10? And it was definitely not a map that we really needed at tier 10, and probably most people actually would rather have it removed, at least in my opinion. But of course I'm not right, I'm just one player, this is my experience. I'm not trying to say that it should be removed. If you guys think it shouldn't, that's fine. But from my experience, yeah, it just feels horrible to actually play because of that fact, 25% of the map pretty much being the only part of the map that you can use. Unless you're a light tank, and even then most people will just YOLO you to get you out, and then they can carry on camping for the rest of the game. So yeah, I don't know. I don't think it is a great designed map for tier 10. It wasn't originally designed to be tier 10. It certainly wasn't designed to be tier 8 or above, basically. So I think we should scrap that whole thing and put it back down to like max tier 6. That would probably be much better. But yeah, that's one map. But of course that's not the only map, because we've seen the introduction of more maps. So of course Wide Park is another one of these maps, and yeah, Wide Park at tier 8 is not particularly very fun, at least for me, because of the fact that you have the exact same problem. And in fact this is a 600 by 600 map, but the whole map is actually usable, so it's actually a better map in terms of actual playability and enjoyment, because you get to use all of the entire map basically, compared to Province where you're using 25% of it. And although Province is a bigger map slightly, you're only using 25% of it, so it's like infinitely smaller than the Wide Park map. But Wide Park as a general rule is a heavy dominant map with tanks like mediums with gun depression that basically can use the map quite well, and if you're playing a heavily armored TD, it works really well. But as you go up through the tiers, once you start getting up to those top tiers, as soon as someone crests the mid-ridge, it spots the entire team, which basically is it's not fun for anyone that doesn't have armor. It's not fun for anyone that is basically trying to be a bit more strategic or anything like that. And it just simply isn't conducive to, I think, the higher tier gameplay. And once again, this map previously was capped at tier 6. It worked quite well at tier 6 because of the same reasons that they don't have max view range for most vehicles. But even that, tier 6s can now have max view range with some of the premiums that have been released. So yeah, I mean, this once again is a lower tier map that Wargaming have introduced as a higher tier map again. So I would definitely be removing that back down to tier 6 maximum and actually start churning out some of the maps that we have been wanting for a long time. And of course start introducing maybe new maps that are a bit different. But the new maps is something I want to talk about later, and some ideas, some suggestions from myself to Wargaming, and of course I'm interested to see your suggestions. What maps would you actually like to see? But there's one more map that was introduced, and it is Liberty Falls. So this is the map that once again has the central area of the map, which is pretty much unusable because of the same reasons of Province, because if you go into the middle of the map, everyone can see you and everyone will shoot you, and therefore you get taken out very, very quickly. So that takes away pretty much 50% of the map, maybe less. It's maybe like 30% of the map is not usable. And then of course you have the two main flanks either side. Now you can go down into the center of the map, but it's usually towards the end of the game where there's maybe like 2 opponents left, 3 opponents, 4 opponents, something like that, and you know where like 3 of them are, and that allows you to go into the middle. So that's the problem with these sorts of maps, is that they only really become usable towards the end of the game, and because they're so small, a lot of the times if a team is very, very efficient and good and completely obliterate one flank, you never even get to go into that position because it's not a close game, because the map is so close together that as soon as a flank is broken, they're basically on the other flank instantly. So yet again, a map that is just not very conducive to above tier 6 in my opinion. It was originally released at tier 10 when they first brought this map back into the game. It was once again originally in the game, but it now goes up to tier 8, which I mean, it's okay, but it's very much at that sort of tier where the higher tier alpha TDs basically just dominate in that sort of gameplay. And I think that once again is another problem, is that when you have higher tier, well, these smaller maps that aren't designed to be higher tier, that certain classes can start really outweighing a lot of the other classes that are in the game. Things like heavy tanks, for example, although there are areas which you can use on Liberty Falls, that they fall into that category where a lot of the TDs that do have incredible camo, so tanks with incredible camo can make these smaller maps work because they have 183 meters still concealment, which is actually enough to stop them from just instantly getting spotted by the tanks, but whilst also allowing them to spot absolutely everyone on the enemy team, comparatively, except from the same people in those same sort of tanks that have that really reduced still concealment to their tank. So that's something that I think could definitely be improved, changed, maybe dropping it even further down to tier 6 to make it a little bit better. But the key problem is that Wargaming wanted to introduce new maps that we could use to be able to have more maps at higher tiers and the tiers that most people are playing. Because I think for the most part, a lot of people are playing tier 6 and above because that is the longest grind. A lot of people playing tiers 8 and 9 where the grind is the biggest to get to the next tank if they're playing tech tree tanks. But we all know this is World of Premium, I guess. But either way, those are the high volume tiers where there's lots of people wanting to play and people grinding out those tanks to get to the tier 10s. And so when it comes to these maps, they just aren't really actually providing engaging or fun gameplay for the majority of people who are actually playing the game. And even if you are a lower tier and you come into a game and oh, it's tier 8, well, now you just get one shot by one vehicle if you get spotted on some of these maps. So it becomes very, very much a nuisance for anyone that is 2 tiers lower, the minimum of the matchmaker, when you do jump into these sorts of games. So if I was going to introduce these maps and try and balance them out, it would be that there is no +1, -1 matchmaking. There's no +2, -2 matchmaking. It's a tier 8 game in the map, or it's a tier 10 game in the map, because as soon as you start introducing lower tiers, the problem only gets amplified to the point where you get spotted by a YOLOing light tank and you're gone from the game because everyone's just camping. So yeah, definitely a problem, and some of these maps just should not have been released at the higher tiers. But yeah, I'd be interested to see whether or not you're enjoying these maps. They can be enjoyable, you can have good games, but the actual enjoyment that I get out of having a good game on these maps is much lower than when I have a good game on much of the other different maps, because it feels more engaging. It's not just a camp fest like you see with a lot of these maps. So that's kind of how it works, at least from my standpoint, but I'm interested to see what you guys think about these new maps that they're introducing, or old maps that they're reintroducing into the game. So yeah, there's definitely some things that I'd like to see in the game. In terms of maps. So when it comes to future maps, because maps are a big problem with the game at the minute, and hopefully Wargaming will start introducing brand new maps. They have been doing that with community maps that we've been seeing, and I think that is a really good thing. I like a lot of the community maps that have come out for console. It's actually probably one of the best things that console have done over their competitors like PC or Blitz, because of the fact that the console maps actually play well. And I think that is something that we can give a credit to. It's just, this sort of thing where they're trying to give you more maps, but they're using maps that aren't designed for those tiers. That's the problem with that. But in terms of new maps and what I'd like to actually see within the game is, of course, for Cold War, you find a lot of these maps are designed for, of course, World War II. The game was supposed to be World War II only, and like 90% of the maps are designed only for World War II. So when it comes to playing, you know, your, I don't know, 80 kilometers an hour light tank, and you're playing on some of the smaller maps in the game, it does mean that you feel like the engagements, the distance of those engagements, it becomes like a YOLO fest. There's a lot more YOLOing that can go on. And so I'd love to see some more maps that are kind of longer distance, or at least have some interesting mechanics with those maps, such as like if you were to get, I don't know, Rolling Hills as a map, for example, where you literally didn't have any buildings. It is just an open map with just hills and obstacles in the form of terrain that actually allow you to use those and be able to avoid shots and stuff like that. So a completely buildingless map, where you can, you know, a lot of the time you're having to push over a hill down into the next dip to get into a better position and stuff like that, and you're fighting around like curves or like riverbeds or stuff like that, you know what I mean? I think that would be really interesting to see as a gameplay, because there aren't really that many maps. I guess one of them is like Sand River, but there's still buildings in there. And Sand River, I kind of like it. It's one of my more favoured maps because you are using the terrain more so than you're using buildings, and having a bit more diversity. Things like Prokhorovka, similar sort of story. It's primarily a terrain orientated map versus a lot of city moving and destroying obstacles to be able to shoot people. And so I think when it comes to that, I'd like to see more emphasis on like the map being quite fluid and dynamic, as opposed to the 3-lane strategies that you typically see with the maps that I've just mentioned, like Prokhorovka. You've got the middle, you've got the hill on one side, and then you've got the kind of foresty, wooded area on the other side. And that is what I'd like to see, one that is not really a 3-lane corridor map that we typically see within the game. And even if it was like a central location that everyone's pushing towards to get into. So we originally had a map, I believe it was like Iceberg or something like that. I can't remember the map name. It'll come to me. Either way, one of you will probably come into Icebound, something like that. But it was basically like a city, a circular city, and you could go around the edges of the city, but you had a lot of corner fighting and stuff within the actual center of the map, and I actually really enjoyed that because it was something different to the typical 3-lane map strategy. Yes, you had 3 lanes, you know, you had the outer side of the circle, you had the right hand side of the circle, but in that central location you could start opening up shots to various different areas of the map, and it made it a lot more fluid and dynamic so that every game wasn't particularly the same, where, oh, we've lost one flank, therefore I need to go to this point on the map and combat that one flank that's been taken out. It would become, you know, one flank's been demolished and then they've all started going into the center of the city, opening up different angles, and so the gameplay always felt different every single time that you played the map, which maybe is why a lot of people found it difficult to play the map. Maybe it wasn't the most liked map in the game. But if there was something a bit more like that and could be worked upon and evolved into something that does feel maybe easier for the casual players who play World of Tanks, because that is primarily the audience of Modern Armour or console, because a lot of people are just dad gamers. You guys are probably may even be a dad gamer, you know, someone that comes on 1 hour, maybe 30 minutes a night, or plays 2 or 3 hours on a weekend or something like that. And I think that that would be a good way to kind of give you something different than your typical maps that we see on the game. And I think it also gives Wargaming free range to try different things. I'm an advocate for trying things, but if they don't work, not trying to force them into making them work. I think that that is a better way of doing it. You know, if you try something and it doesn't work, that's fine. Doesn't mean that you have to try and force it to work. And I think that that would be nice to see, because if it does work, that is going to be really, really good for a lot of people and have a much better experience of, you know, when you're playing in the game, getting a bit more variety, and also bringing it in for Cold War so that, you know, you've got those maps that are more long range in distance engagement, so that you're not forced into this YOLO fest that basically happens when one flank is won and like 6 or 7 tanks rolling at 80 kilometers an hour end up in the base within the first 2 minutes of the game starting. So I would love to see these sorts of maps be developed, and those are some of the things that I would recommend to Wargaming. Of course, you guys are going to have your different opinion as to all of this, so once again, I'll be down in the comment section looking for those. And yeah, I'm really interested to see your thoughts on maps and World of Tanks console at the minute. But in terms of some extra things that I wanted to add to this video is that if you want to watch me live streaming, I will be live streaming more now. I am going to be going part-time at work, which allows me to spend more time actually engaging with you guys, posting more videos, and just give me a break from grinding out like an entire work day of 8 hours every single day, and then coming home and then doing an additional 3-4 hours of doing videos and stuff like that. And this isn't the only channel that I do. We've got multiple channels that I actually run, so that has allowed me to now go full-time, or at least like 5 days a week doing YouTube, which is fantastic, and of course still being an engineer for 2 days a week. So I thought I'd give you a little update as to what's happening, what you'll probably see: more streams, more videos more consistently like we previously did, where it's like daily content. Maybe I'll even throw in 2 videos in a day, maybe if there's a news video as well as like a gameplay video at the same day. But it just depends what you guys are enjoying, what you'd like me to do, and if you've got any suggestions as to maybe a series or something that you would find useful, then make sure to comment that down in the comment section down below as well. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day, and I really do appreciate all of your support on all of the videos that we've been doing. It's amazing to really have the opportunity to at least try and do this semi full time. I don't know what you want to call it, but yeah, you guys are the reason for that, so I can't thank you enough. So thank you, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.